Welcome to ShockOrama, your source for all things shock, schlock, and just plain bizarre. I'm Ben Sherman, and today we're taking a look at an obscure 80s high school comedy with a sci-fi twist. Mindbenders checks off everything you would expect from the genre: a psychotic ex-military principal, an over-the-top nerd caricature, the jock bully, the cool guys, sexually forward ladies, and because they were feeling nice, they decide to throw in an alien plot to mind control the entire world. The alien plot doesn't really kick in until pretty far into the movie, so most of the time we're just getting your typical 80s high school shenanigans. Reading the IMDb reviews for the film, it looks like there's quite a few complaints that the movie is very slow because of this, but I honestly disagree. Everything in the movie is bigger than life. The characters and situations stretch to the breaking point of believability, and then a little bit farther. The film opens with the main characters driving a sports car through a snowman, followed by one of the most chaotic food fights put on screen, and steadily increases the intensity throughout. I think there's an argument to be made that this is a punk rock movie in attitude and in themes. While the movie itself has obvious to the point of eye-roll themes of anti-authority and sticking it to the man, the frantic energy of everyone on screen comes from the low-budget, by any means necessary approach of the filmmakers, which started even before the film had been written. Director Eugenie Joseph was already no stranger to low-budget filmmaking and all that it entails when she was hired to direct Mindbenders. She had previously been hired as the fourth and final director of the absolutely insane production hell of a movie Spookies, which at the time when she was hired was over 3 hours long. Her job had been to cut those 3 hours down to a more usable 45 minutes, and then fill out the rest of the movie with none of the original actors available and the production budget long since eaten up. I really need to make a video about Spookies at some point. But when producer and longtime collaborator Jack Bravman handed Eugenie Joseph the pitifully short and improperly formatted first draft of the script for Mindbenders, she quickly realized that she would need to do a full rewrite with less than 2 weeks before filming was scheduled to start. Skip Lackey, a graduate of clown college and professional circus clown, as well as a former student of Sanford Meisner, whose acting techniques were very popular amongst film actors, had first met Eugenie Joseph when the two of them had been hired together to create film versions of Tony Robbins' self-growth seminars. The two of them had kept in touch and collaborated as writing partners on several other projects before starting Mindbenders. When Eugenie Joseph realized that she would need to write a full script with a very tight deadline, she immediately invited Skip Lackey to her hotel in Montreal, where the two of them banged out the full shooting script of Mindbenders in just 10 delirious days. Initial auditions were held in New York City, where most of the main cast was found, and more auditions were held at the shooting location in Montreal, Canada. Some notable cast members include Roy Thinnis, who had starred as the lead character in the classic 60s TV show The Invaders, Lee Tergesen in his first film role, who would later go on to star in the shows Oz and Weird Science, as well as a small role in Wayne's World, Miranda DePensier, who would go on to a successful career as a film and TV producer, and Bill Curry, who stars as the alien disguised as a psychologist. Curry had also studied under Sanford Meisner alongside Skip Lackey and was working as a model in New York when Lackey called him up to be in Mindbenders just a couple days before shooting began. Bill Curry and his then-wife Alicia Munn both flew up to Montreal to be in the movie, with Alicia Munn starring opposite her husband in a scene where her character, Miss Knight, is the first person to get the mind control technology tested on her. Skip Lackey himself stars as a co-lead alongside Lee Tergesen as Frankie Lawrence. He delivers one of the most physically comedic performances thanks to his clown training, along with David Kerner, who plays the Harvard-bound nerd Calvin. With this colorful cast of mostly new actors and the ink on their script still drying, filming was ready to start. The production was given access to an actual high school. The catch was they had to wrap up filming before the actual students and teachers came back from winter break, so that meant they could only schedule 20 days to shoot. Shooting mainly took place at night, aside from a couple shots outside and at a local mall. But to make matters more difficult, on night 18, a massive storm came through. The producers told the crew that there was no way they'd be able to get back in to shoot for the last 2 days, so anything they still needed for the movie, they had to get done that night. Eugenie Joseph and Skip Lackey looked through the script and started cutting anything that wasn't absolutely necessary to complete the movie, and then the already exhausted cast and crew stayed up until dawn to get every shot they could. Now, after all that frantic work, did the filmmakers' efforts pay off? Well, I'll let you decide. It's time to rock out with Mindbenders. As the movie starts, we are introduced to our 4 high school protagonists. Calvin is your typical nerd archetype, complete with thick glasses and Buster Keaton-esque mannerisms. The blonde girl with crimped hair is Julie, his girlfriend, who is nearly as obsessed with heavy metal as she is with Calvin. One of my favorite things throughout this movie is how much fun she has literally throwing herself at Calvin throughout the runtime. Next, we see driving around in a Pontiac Fiero GT, Frankie and Crash, who want nothing more than to spend their days hitting on women at the mall and playing loud rock music on their school radio show. In reality, Frankie's sports car was borrowed from a producer for the film. Much of Calvin's wardrobe was also borrowed, this time from a up-and-coming fashion designer, which is why during that opening food fight at the school, he's doing his best not to get any food on his clothes. That sweater he's wearing cost over $800. Their fellow students are, well, extremely over the top. In fact, if you just added some gratuitous nudity and violence, this school would be right at home in a trauma film. Are we in Canada or New Jersey? But the crazier the student body gets, the more determined Principal Borden gets to whip them into shape. He's the kind of guy that you can tell felt right at home in the violent military world of the Vietnam War, and he makes it no secret that he wants his students to be as disciplined and obedient to him as his soldiers had been. It should come as no surprise then, after taking one too many pies to the face, that Principal Borden is ready to take drastic measures to forcefully get the respect that he feels he deserves from the students. During an emergency staff meeting where he calls all of his teachers limp-wristed liberal staff members who know nothing about authority or leadership, he introduces Dr. Gunbow from the Behavior Modification Research Institute. Dr. Gunbow claims that when he was a student at Harvard, he had started experimenting with inserting subliminal commands into musical tones in order to achieve behavioral changes within his human test subjects. And now he would like to test out this technology on a larger population of ill-behaved students. Principal Borden is very excited to begin this testing, especially since it means he can shut down the student radio station in order for them to be able to play these subliminal commands over the school sound system. There's some resistance from the teachers, but after Dr. Gunbow demonstrates the technology on Miss Knight, who, as I mentioned before, was played by Bill Curry's then-wife, Alicia Munn, they concede that there could be potential for positive results. Unbeknownst to the faculty, their entire meeting has been overheard by Calvin and Julie, who had snuck into the library to, as Frankie and Crash put it, practice ancient sex rituals. They're both upset about the threat of losing the student radio station, and Calvin rushes to tell Frankie and Crash about the impending shutdown. Of course, the two of them aren't happy to be losing their favorite means of dispensing rock and roll to the school, but they don't take it too seriously since, as Crash puts it, high schoolers don't care about anything.
Come on, man, you can't organize high school students. Don't you want 60 minutes? We don't care about anything. We're apathetic.
This leads to some shenanigans at the local mall where Crash and Frankie try hitting on 2 women who are way out of their league. Calvin tries desperately but unsuccessfully to get signatures for a petition to save the radio station. And Julie sits on the mall Santa's lap and starts going down the list of all the things she's looking for in a man. By the end of this, they're all pretty tired, and we learn through dialogue that Calvin's dad is really rich and he's been accepted to Harvard. Frankie gives Crash a ride home, and we get to see a little bit of their at-home lives. Frankie sneaks into his bedroom through the window and manages to pretend to be asleep before his mother, who was played by producer Jack Bravman's wife, suspiciously comes in to check on him. Frankie's bedroom was also the producer's apartment at the time. Crash, on the other hand, runs into his angry mother, who yells at him for spending so long at the mall, calls him a bum, and then compares him to his good-for-nothing father. This leads to the requisite shot of Crash sitting against his bedroom window, shirtless and looking moody, in that cool guy with problems in an 80s movie kind of way. The next morning, after some more clowning around, Frankie comes downstairs to his very disappointed family, who just got a phone call from the school telling them that Frankie will be put into an experimental class. And that sure as heck sounds like a disciplinary thing for troublemakers. Principal Borden and Dr. Gunbo have wasted no time setting up a sign on the radio station door explaining that it is closed until further notice, and even posting a guard outside of Dr. Gunbo's new office. Principal Borden is so pleased with himself that he decides to lock himself in his office to play soldier, shouting marching commands to himself. That look of secondhand embarrassment on his secretary's face is what we're all feeling watching him. This is the first day of the experimental class being held in room 9X1. The sound system has been set up to pump Dr. Gunbo's music into only this room for now, but since it hasn't been turned on yet, we're treated to yet more chaos and carnage as the protagonists enter the room. We also learn that Calvin charges $9.75 to rewrite people's history papers for them. Now, is that in American or Canadian dollars? If you're feeling a little claustrophobic, it might be because all of these scenes in the school were carefully shot so as not to show any windows, because as I already mentioned, this movie was shot almost completely at night. No wonder all the actors seem to be feeling a bit punchy. Also, a couple of the extras in these scenes, like this guy with the spiky hair, only spoke French because they were local French-Canadian actors. That makes a later scene where this class is being taught French that much funnier, because most of these actors probably spoke more French than the teacher did. Now is when we get our first demonstration of the power of Dr. Gunbo's behavior-modifying tones. That actually sounds like a good album title. The loudspeakers start pumping those spooky tones in as soon as the teacher hands out a test, and suddenly, the class has gone from the worst of the worst in juvenile delinquency to a bunch of straight-A students. All except for Frankie, Julie, and Crash, who have been listening to music on their headphones this whole time. These guys really just misbehaved their way out of being mind-controlled. Meanwhile, Principal Borden and Dr. Gunbo have become thick as thieves.
Really think this music thing will work?
There's no question that it works. The question is how far we choose to take it.
Borden likes the sound of that. Dr. Gunbo also explains how the subliminal commands can be altered to do things like, for instance, make all of the students unquestioningly obedient to Principal Borden. Borden really likes the sound of that. Borden is so happy with this behavior program that he even treats himself to more of that sweet, sweet alone time in his office, this time playing with his toy planes. You could say this guy's got a complex. A military-industrial complex, eh? Get it? I'll be here all week. Get it? And it looks like the behavior modification experiment is working, because the test scores from the experimental classroom are extremely good. Principal Borden even remarks that he had the distinct pleasure of being greeted by name by several of the students, and even having them hold the door open for him. Basic manners? The horror! When Principal Borden and the teacher he's with check back in on the experimental classroom, the French teacher inside, who the girls would normally be ripping apart, according to the teacher outside, is instead teaching a relatively calm, if albeit sexually charged lesson. I say that because he is making a lot of sexually explicit jokes to this class of high schoolers, which he really should be getting fired for. Borden fails to notice the planetary imagery and alien writing on Gunbo's computer when he walks into his office to ask that Gunbo start speeding things up a bit. You see, the students are being obedient already, but they could be being more obedient. Principal Borden wants these students to be acting downright subservient to him. But Dr. Gunbo tries to warn him away from this kind of thinking, pointing out that this experiment is altering neurological patterns, and if they push the students too hard, it could have bad consequences. Borden yeses him until Gunbo eventually leaves, but then he starts going through all of the program disks to see what modifications he can make on his own. He boots up one of the disks and programs in to have the students be completely obedient to him. However, there are already too many commands running, so he has to delete one of them. The obvious choice for the one to delete is, of course, non-violence.
Non-violence. We don't want to create a bunch of little pacifists, do we?
And with that, he boots up the program and has it play his new commands. Crash and Frankie, the slackers that they are of course completely unbothered through all of this. Their main concern right now is finding smaller headphones that'll be easier to hide so they can keep rocking out in class without their teacher noticing. They even have time to put on an impromptu Beastie Boys style performance in the bathroom, which Calvin hears and attempts to join in on, but
When I know the truth, there is no doubt. I'm going to Harvard because my father's got money! Clout!
Well, let's just say he's lacking that certain je ne sais quoi. But the good times do not last long, because back in class 9X1, the students are already feeling the effects of Principal Borden's tampering. When one student catches another one cheating on a test, he immediately announces it to the teacher, which leads to a full-blown fist fight between the two of them. Roy, the boy who had been caught cheating, gets led out of the classroom by Dr. Gunbo for a one-on-one counseling session. However, this seems to have started a chain reaction as other students begin loudly announcing to the teacher other minor infractions they've witnessed their fellow students commit. Crash and Frankie are looking around thinking the same thing I am. Who the hell are these students, and what did they do with the originals? It's like something out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. When weird mind control stuff is going on at your high school, who do you turn to? Your nerd friend, of course. Unfortunately, it's still a bit too early for them to figure anything out, so all the three of them can land on for now is that they need to find some way of getting all the other students wound up again to break them out of this calm spell. Well, they'd better hurry and figure this out because the situation is getting worse. In a beauty and cosmetics class, a small argument over littering quickly turns into an all-out brawl, complete with hair pulling, smashing faces against walls, throwing people into garbage cans, burning people's faces with hair irons, and then they even set a stunt woman's hair on fire. Julie just happens to be walking by and quickly runs to tell the boys about what's happening. All four of them run back to the classroom, but Dr. Gunbo has beaten them there, playing music to hypnotize the other girls while he leads the girl with the burnt hair away for a one-on-one counseling session. The boys meet up after school in Frankie's room to try and work out what's been going on. Calvin says he remembers reading a magazine article once about experiments with putting subliminal messages in music to change people's behavior.
What do you think subliminal means?
Well, you know, it has to do with sex drive, right?
That's libidinal. Oh, well, excuse me for living, Mr. World Book Encyclopedia Britannica.
There's another brawl at school the next day, this time in gym class. One boy gets beaten so severely that he's coughing up blood, and he gets led away by Dr. Gunbo for, you guessed it, another one-on-one counseling session. The next class after gym is in the machine shop, and can I just say it is absolutely wild to me that high schools in the 80s apparently had classes like cosmetics or how to become a car mechanic. Was this really that common back then, or is it mostly just a thing from movies? Anyways, in the machine shop, the boys hatch a plan to sneak into Dr. Gunbo's office so they can steal all the discs his music is on so they can finally figure out what the hell is going on. Just then, Steve, the boy who'd gotten the absolute shit beat out of him in gym class, walks in the room looking and acting like absolutely nothing had happened. The boys are, of course, shocked to see this, since just 2 hours ago he had been looking like he was about to die. Our four protagonists put their plan in motion, with Julie acting as a decoy to get the security guard away from Gunbo's office.
Well, I guess.
Oh, have you done?
Yes, miss.
The boys get inside the office and find all of the discs, but they also find a list of names. They quickly realize that these are the names of all the students that Gunbo has brought in for his one-on-one counseling sessions, and worryingly, Julie's name is the next on the list. During this, Julie has gotten the guard to carry her to the nurse's office for a fake twisted ankle, but unfortunately, once they get there, Dr. Gunbo finds them and sends the guard back to his office while he takes a look at Julie's ankle. Gunbo gets way too handsy with Julie, looking like he's about to kiss her, before we cut back to the boys narrowly escaping the office with the discs. And this is another question I have. Why do so many of these older high school movies love to sexualize underage teenagers? Thankfully, the actors playing the high schoolers are typically in their 20s, but just the whole idea of a teacher in their 40s forming some kind of romantic relationship with a teenager is so creepy to me. The boys find Julie later to show her that they got all of the discs, including the master disc, but she's uninterested, saying that she'd rather go study with a friend right now. Oh no, they got Julie too, those bastards! That night, the three boys once again meet in Frankie's room and start listening to the tapes together, but they haven't been able to find anything yet except for those strange musical tones. They do seem to be having somewhat of an effect on them though, since Crash is getting increasingly agitated, even getting physical with Frankie. Calvin breaks up the fight, saying he's going to take the discs to his house and play them on his sound analyzer. The next day, in class 9x1, Principal Borden and Dr. Gunbo decide to test just how effective these mind control discs have been by having all the students pair up to interrogate each other to find the disc thieves. It goes about how you'd expect, with most of the students getting extremely worked up over false accusations and their desire to be the best teacher's pet. Yeesh. Luckily, Frankie and Crash are paired up with each other.
Did you steal those discs? Me? Does this look like the face of a disc thief to you? Well, I guess that about wraps up our interrogation. Yeah, I guess it just about does.
But it's quickly revealed that the only purpose of this exercise was to test the effectiveness of the mind control discs, since Dr. Gunbo reveals to Borden in the hallway that he already knows who stole the discs. When Borden angrily asks him who the thieves are, Gunbo's eye glows red, which has this creepy calming effect on Borden. But Borden figures out who it was anyway, and calls Frankie, Crash, and Calvin to his office to demand that they return the discs to him. He claims to have a witness, which I can only imagine is Julie, since she's been mind-controlled by Gunbo now and was the only other person to know about their plan. They promise to bring the discs back to the school that night and return them to Borden. Once again in Frankie's room, Calvin enters to tell the other two what he's discovered. It turns out, when he called the Behavior Modification Research Institute, they claim to have never heard of Dr. Gunbo, and confirmed that he does not and has never worked there. Calvin also called Harvard, and they claim to have never had a Dr. Gunbo either as a researcher or a student. But that's not all. When Calvin analyzed the master disc in his sound analyzer, he discovered that Dr. Gunbo is putting implants in the students to better mind control them, and this is what's been happening during all of those counseling sessions. He says there's a couple different ways they can go about breaking the mind control, all having to do with raising adrenaline levels. So things like sexual arousal, listening to loud rock music, you know, the kind of things the students used to do all the time. Thankfully, since this video is going on YouTube, they decide to go the loud rock music route. Frankie and Crash will meet with Borden like they'd planned, but Calvin will sneak into the radio station to rewire it to play their music again. At first, the plan seems to be going really well, and they even tell Principal Borden about Gunbo's fake credentials. But it all falls apart when Gunbo himself emerges with his army of mind-controlled students. Gunbo freezes Borden with his red eye, and then installs an implant through his ear with a needle. Then Gunbo drops the bombshell that he's an alien.
Haven't you figured it out?
What?
I'm an alien.
Pretty casually, if you ask me. The boys have had just about enough of this and managed to break free, starting a long chase sequence through the dark hallways of the school, leading all the way to the machine shop and several indoor parked cars. There's some solid stunt work as they drag one student along the ground and crash two of the cars together. They have to knock out Julie when she attacks them with an axe, and then finally make it back to the radio station. Unfortunately, Gunbo has already gotten to Calvin, who is now guarding the radio station with a gun. Frankie and Crash manage to wrestle him down and force him to listen to the rock music playing on their headphones, which breaks the mind control. The three of them quickly enter the radio station room, where Calvin pretends to hold the other two at gunpoint just as Gunbo and his army arrive. Acting fast, Frankie throws the master disc at the wall, Calvin fires his gun in the air, and Frankie and Crash quickly put on some rock music and turn it up as loud as it'll go. The mind-controlled students and Principal Borden all collapse to the floor, and Dr. Gunbo starts turning very blue. A little bit like this. This is makeup courtesy of my lovely wife, Athena P. You can find her on YouTube as Athena P. I'm also realizing now that this looks weirdly similar to Thanos. This guy might actually be Thanos' grandfather. Gunbo rushes out and they chase him to the auditorium, where he gets beamed up to his spaceship with some fantastically cheesy special effects. Honestly, this alien makeup that they did for him looks really good, and it was apparently designed and applied by one of the makeup effects artists from Spookies, who Eugenie Joseph was able to get in touch with thanks to her work on that film. I believe the effects artist in question was Arnold Gargiulo, who, along with Spookies and Mindbenders, also did special effects work on George Romero's Day of the Dead and the cult classic film Frankenhooker. There is a good chance that his name will pop up again in some future videos on this channel. Frankie reveals, after the alien is gone, that he'd actually given him a fake disc, and the real master disc is in Frankie's back pocket. The movie ends with a classic freeze frame as they all high-five and laugh. Mindbenders may be a lesser-known entry in the canon of North American cult films, but I think it is very much worth seeing, even if just as an historical curiosity from the early years of some beloved cult filmmakers. The punk ethos that fueled this production really shines through in the frantic, relentless energy that permeates every part of this movie. To me, this is a true gem of low-budget filmmaking and is definitely worth your time if you have any interest in oddball comedies. Having watched the film multiple times now, I think the pacing is better than some online reviewers give it credit for. And the acting performances, while hammy, are perfect for the kind of movie they were trying to make. Of course, it would never win any awards, but this is the kind of movie that you really need to enjoy under the influence of your substance of choice, preferably with a group of like-minded friends who are all down to laugh at some original and goofy filmmaking. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell icon if you'd like to see more videos like this. And, as always, stay weird.